Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this in-session talk, Independent Publishing, a Survival Guide. We have over 370 guests from 50 countries joining us. Before I introduce you to our esteemed guests, please allow me to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, as you can probably see. We will be able to share a link to the recording at some point after the event. We aim to have an interactive session today, and we invite you to ask questions by using the Q&A button. You can upvote any questions you find interested to hear answered by our panel. And please use the chat button if you have any technical difficulties regarding the webinar. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Adrian, Plan B and Fuel. I'm going to hand you over to Adrian, who is going to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Joe. That was a very nice introduction. Okay, so I was going to say it's very nice to see everyone, but of course I can only see the panelists. So I hope everyone's there. But thank you for joining. As Joe said, my name is Adrian Shaughnessy, and I'm a graphic designer, a writer. I write about design. I'm an associate lecturer at the RCA, and conveniently for this session, I'm also a publisher. Now, if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, our topic would most likely be, can the printed book survive in the era of the internet, in the era of ebooks, and the much touted end of literacy? But that's not what we're going to talk about today. The printed book has survived, thrived even. Bookshops are opening where once they were closing. Publishers are reporting record profits. And it's even possible to see the occasional person on the London Underground reading a book, an actual book, that weird technology made from ink, paper, and glue. And all of this at a time when digital technology has transformed and disrupted countless aspects of modern life. Reading a broadsheet newspaper in public looks increasingly like an act of eccentricity. Not only has the printed book thrived, but the publishing industry has also been transformed. What was once a rich man's club, white, middle class, and fueled by expense account lunches, is now a much more open and democratic field. The gatekeepers are no longer able to keep out the undesirables. Even the definition of publishing has changed. It's not an exaggeration to say that anyone, as long as they're willing to do the work, can publish. You can, of course, publish online at almost zero cost. And if your heart is set on publishing a physical book, perhaps one that a traditional publisher would dismiss, it's never been easier to do this. Yes, it will cost you more than a blog post or a Facebook post, but it is possible to do it and get your baby into the hands of audiences in ways that were unthinkable only a few years ago. So today we're going to talk about what it means to be an independent publisher, how to get started, how to make books, how to find a public, and all points in between. And there are many points in between. To do this, I've got two excellent opponents of indie publishing with me. And I'm going to ask them in a moment to introduce themselves and to give a brief description of their imprint. They might even show you the sort of books that they publish. And both Fuel and Plan B, or Sold Out as their publishing arm is known, have roots in the RCA. They're all graduates of the RCA. So let's get on with it. I'm going to ask Betty and Baki, or both of you, or one of you, to introduce yourselves and to maybe talk a little bit about your imprint, the sort of books that you guys publish.
Sure. Okay, let's get started. Thank you, Adrian, for having us. So I'm Bakhtawer, and I've got Betty with me.
Hi.
And we started Plan B around 3 weeks ago officially, and we also started Sold Out. I've known Betty for 5 years now, And I met her also at the same time as Adrian. So this is a nice reunion in a way. And what Plan B does, it's a design studio, and most of the time we look into finding sustainable solutions, but also decolonial methods in the way we work. But we're going to talk about Sold Out primarily today because we're talking about publishing. And I'm going to let Betty talk about Sold Out.
Hi. As Baki said, our publishing arm is called Sold Out. It's slightly separate from our design venture. So with Sold Out, started with kind of our frustration with graphic design references and canons that we were given throughout our education. And in general, we were a bit frustrated to by the lack of diversity that we were seeing. And so that's how Sold Out started. It actually started as like a fake publishing house that was publishing books that didn't exist, which is why they were all sold out. But then in the end, we were like, this is a bit silly, might as well actually publish books. And then we started to publish books from, to begin with, by students that we were actually studying with, that were actually representing work we were missing in like actually published work. We were seeing their work and we're like, this is worth publishing. It's sad that there's not more work like that. And they were all either like decolonial, queer, like you had some themes that we were missing within like art, design, and like visual culture in general. And they were talking about certain themes that we were quite interested in. And that's how Sold Out started. And Adrian, please cut me off if I'm like out of my time. I don't know if, no, we're okay. Cool. And what else can we say? We've published, let me show you a few of them. We've published, I think, 7 maybe books so far. They all look very different because they're all designed by different designers and they're all written by different designers. So that was the whole point of Sold Out, is that we publish books that we don't necessarily design because our design is within Plan B. And so, yeah, so that is about bringing more like perspectives and within graphic design references and visual culture. That's
and
it.
I will say one thing. Betty and I were in a class with Adrian, and he gave us a brief, and he said, your brief is do whatever you want. And this was 5 years ago. The result of the brief is now here in front of you. So thank you, Adrian. Some of the credit goes to you.
That's very nice to hear. That's an insane, but anyway, I see you guys have really embraced it. Thank you both. Stephen, Damon, would you like to introduce yourselves and Fuel Publishing?
Yeah, I'm Stephen Sorrell, and this is Damon. We met at the Royal College of Art and started Fuel in 1991. We started publishing our own magazine called Fuel. I don't know if you want to grab it. We published four issues of the magazine at the Royal College, including one that was based on a trip to Moscow in 1992, which kind of fueled an interest in Russia and the Soviet era culture and graphics. So that was kind of quite inspiring for us, that trip, and led to other projects later on. We've always been involved with publishing, publishing our own work as well as designing books for other publishers. Very good.
I'm doing a great job here, aren't I?
And I think importantly, when we left college, we always did our own work, our personal projects alongside our commercial work. And that's something we've always done. And I think when we started publishing books under the imprint Fuel in about 20 years ago, it kind of felt like quite a natural progression to be creating our own books, but actually having them properly published and distributed.
Yeah, by contrast, we sort of come up with, not necessarily with the ideas for our books, but we certainly pick and choose exactly what we want to publish and generally people who we approach haven't already had the idea to make it into a book. It's up to us to try and galvanize that into book format.
The type of books we publish now, there's a couple here. Again, these are sort of Russian themed, but more recently we have published one on London council estates and brutalist architecture in Italy. So I guess they're all kind of a lot of architecture based graphics,
culture, general culture. Yeah.
They quite often start with an archive, like a collection of work. And we work with a guy called Johnny Trunk, who's big on finding archives that are kind of need to be explored and shown to people. And we kind of
forgotten culture, basically. Yeah.
Well, that's a nice way to look at it. Betty and Baki talked about stuff that wouldn't find conventional a publishing outlet. You guys looking at things like forgotten culture. I think those are really good driving forces for wanting to publish. Maybe we could just think a little bit about the process. So, Betty, Baki, what when you want to produce something, what's your first step? How do you go about initiating something?
It's different every time. I would say in the beginning, it was about actively looking for authors, artists, designers that we wanted to see published, and we just couldn't see it in our reference list or in the education system or in the industry. And so there was almost this gut instinct in connecting with people and thinking, okay, you're about to produce something, you're in the process of doing it, and we can step in. And now it's shifting a little bit in some ways where people sometimes come to us and they see we are the right fit as publishers. But really, most of the time, it's a very organic process, and I wouldn't say there's a distinct recipe to it.
Yeah. Stephen, Damon, what about you? You talked about this idea of hidden cultures and forgotten cultures. What percentage of work of your publishing output do you originate? In other words, do you say we want to do a book on this subject? And then you have the other side of that is people come to you with ideas. How does that balance up?
I mean, it changes all the time. I don't think there's a set percentage, but I think probably the majority of it is us looking at something and saying we could do a book on that, because I think that's what it takes. You have to have, you know, that you're not you're going to put a lot of energy into a book and a lot of time, and you might not necessarily make enough money out of it, or it might be something that is a bit of a labor of love. Let's put it that way. So, in order to kind of make that value decision, you have to be prepared to give away that time, and you have to be into the subjects enough to give that time to it. Otherwise, there's kind of no point.
I think you've touched on something a really rich area that we need to discuss. Really, this idea of love. I mean, I think we're all attracted. Certainly, it was my reason for getting involved in publishing. It comes from a love of books. It certainly doesn't come through a love of money, because to make money as a publisher, as an independent publisher, I mean, if somebody knows how to do it, then please put it in the chat, because I think it's one of life's great mysteries. So maybe we should just talk a little bit about this whole question of funding. And I noticed, and I have as well, I noticed you've both used crowdfunding. I think you guys sold out with Kickstarter. Was that right?
Yeah, it was COVID as well.
Oh.
So it was 2020, and it was everything was online. So in a way, and I remember because we launched sold out at the RCA was our final year project almost that never ended. And then we used the final show of the RCA to kickstart Sold Out, literally, with a Kickstarter. And we used the like resources that were available to us at the time to like organize a talk and stuff like that to bring a bit of like noise, I guess, around it. It was quite the time to start it, so that made sense. But yeah, Kickstarter is quite intense. We didn't realize before we started how intense crowdfunding is and how the responsibility of it as well. Like we knew, but also didn't fully know, I think. Until you do it, you don't really know. But it's a really good process. You learn a lot, but yeah, it's a lot of responsibility as well.
It was just so intense, and we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. And we wrote as a reward, because in Kickstarter, you have to do a reward system. And Betty and I had this idea of writing a book as a reward within 2 months. And we did it. We wrote a whole book. But the intensity of leading up to a Kickstarter and everything that comes after it was, yeah, quite something. And we did it again, and we're probably going to do it again. But this has been kind of the system of funding our books so far.
Yeah.
Damon and Stephen, I know you started, but you started pre-Kickstarter. I
mean, we fund our own books anyway, but we have used Kickstarter as a way to kind of promote them and get kind of advance orders, and we tend to do it when the author has a big kind of following, and it's kind of a way of generating some advance orders that helps to pay for the print cost and
general knowledge about the book. You know, if someone's doing a book and they've got, 250,000 followers or whatever, then they're going to post about that Kickstarter on there to their followers, and that is going to help promote the book and generally get the word around. And also, obviously people who invest in it tell their friends. So, hopefully you're going to get some traction out of it.
And so, to what extent does? I suppose my question is Fuel Publishing self-funding, or do you support it through the design company? How does that?
No, it is self-funding, and also, we didn't really do the Kickstarter just to get enough money to make the book, because I think we would have made the book anyway. It's just like a help. But yeah, I think in terms of our commercial work, the publishing side has sort of taken over a little bit. So, the books have to be sustainable on their own.
Financially sustainable.
Yeah. And, fortunately, they always have been. So, we've never had that thing where we can only publish a book if we get a certain amount of commercial work.
Yeah.
I mean, that might have been the case with our early magazines, but not since we've properly published books.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it's certainly something that I've experienced, is that if you're not doing it full time, if you have other jobs, then it becomes an incredibly time consuming activity. And I can think of times when, in order to finish a book, the writing or the editing or the designing, I mean, it requires an enormous amount of time and energy. And I'm often envious of people who just have publishing companies, because that must be a very happy situation. Can we talk a little bit about the commissioning process? Because clearly we're all designers here, so we know how to design books. But what about things like photography and additional skills? I mean, editing. I mean, Stephen, when we briefly met before to discuss today's discussion, you raised the question of editing and how fundamental that is to the bookmaking process. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the editing side of things can take almost longer than the design, and it's a continual kind of fine tuning. And we actually do an initial layout sort of fairly quickly, and then the editing sort of comes in where you're kind of improving things and tweaking things for 6 months or longer. But in terms of
there's also like text editing as well, which obviously we kind of start on that because we got a fairly decent grasp of English, and then that obviously we try and get other people to read that and then get it proofread, and then we go through a certain process with each book, because I think our books compared to some design books are quite text heavy sometimes. So there's that end of it. If you don't know about the end of it, that end of it really needs to be tight.
Yeah.
And you need to get people on board that do know about the end of it.
There's an interesting question just come into the chat, which I'm going to ask about in a minute. But Betty and Becky, this whole question of collaboration and working with other people, you began by saying you often some of your books you just give to someone to deliver a complete package. Is that the way you always work, or do you do are there other ways you function?
Betty, do you want to answer this one first?
I don't mind. It's I think it's so dependent. We have had a few collaborators that wanted our input. We usually so we're both not perfect English speakers. Becky's quite.
Well, it's still not my first language.
Yeah, it's not our first language.
Don't have a good grasp on English.
No, you do. But so we usually do use a proofreader or an editor that's not us. And then in terms of edit, we usually we're always open to give feedback with whoever we're collaborating with. And we have a very transparent and helpful kind of setting, but we're really open to them also doing making those decisions, or but that might change in the future. That's how we've operated so far. I think we've discussed also doing stuff, publishing books where we lead a little bit more. But I think we like to alternate, and sometimes taking the backseat. It's also it's kind of an interesting exercise as a designer to give away that power to someone else to design, to edit, to make those decisions. And you're okay, I would have not made those decisions, but that's fine. But that's kind of the point, because the whole point.
It was very intentional. Us giving up that power in the beginning was exactly what we wanted Sold Out to be about. That if we want you to publish with us, you also have autonomy. And in a way that works with our ethos as well, that if we're saying we're here to decolonize, we're here to offer different perspectives within the industry, show us what your perspective is. And that also starts with you decide how your cover is summarizing your interpretation of your own book. So in the beginning, there was a lot less imposition. We've also learned that that's not always possible as a publisher. Sometimes you have this instinct and you know what will work and what might not be, what the world is maybe not ready for yet. And we don't fully have a grasp on that yet, but we're learning, and we share that feedback and that advice with our authors, I would say.
Yeah.
We're not that generous. We make all the decisions. We're very focused, and it even says in our contract that people have to let us have the final say in design.
We're dictators.
Yeah.
We're dictators.
Well, I mean, that's what makes a field book. It's our vision, and that's what we've had day one, really.
I think oh, sorry. I think for us, it's also because we have Plan B, where we can express our design and be the dictatorship on that side. Then we get to be okay, yeah, you do that on the other.
I think the question that's hovering over this part of the conversation, I think, is something I've always been intrigued by, is that what do designers have? Do they have anything that lends itself to the role of publisher? Because within the conventional traditional publishing world, designers fairly low down in some cases very low down the food chain. But here's an example. All of us designers of different types, but we're all designers. and yet we've all embraced this world of publishing. What do you think? Throw this question open. What do designers bring to publishing? And by publishing, I mean, I'm not talking about the technical aspect of producing books. This whole aspect of making public, taking content and making it public. What do designers have any aptitude for that?
I think it's again, sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think a critical eye, you kind of have to have a vision of what you want to say in the visuals and in the text. And I think if you've got a kind of direction and a kind of vision of the way you want a book to be seen.
It's about an idea of what makes a good book, I think. It's as simple as that. And a designer will know what they want to read and also how they want it to look. And that's kind of, I guess that's why we work like we do.
I mean, I think our books are quite varied in the subject matter, but I think they always look like a fuel book.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's quite difficult because, you've got a different market for a certain type of book that won't necessarily be interested in another book that you've done.
Yeah.
But they're kind of all under this fuel publishing group.
Yeah. I can see how it works in your favor because you have a house style. I could probably spot partly through the subject matter, I must say, but I could also spot a fuel book at.
But that's the thing you've said there is you can spot a fuel book from the subject matter, which is also about editing. So the whole thing it's about it's about the elements being a little bit inseparable. So you see the cover for the book and you think, well, that fits perfectly with the subject matter, and then you read about it and that fits perfectly with the images, and the whole thing kind of clicks together in the end.
Yeah,
and I think that's what a designer can bring to publishing.
Yeah, and homogeneous approach. Yeah. Becky, any thoughts on that?
Becky,
Yeah, I think for us, it's very much from the beginning when we were students, when we were starting out in the industry, you had this mindset of looking for something. And sometimes I was intuitive. Sometimes you go to a bookshop, a gallery, and you find something that piques your interest. But sometimes you're searching and searching and nothing really fits your project. Nothing really fits the reference that you're looking for. And I think it's a mix of curiosity, but also understanding gaps in knowledge or how knowledge is spoken about, distributed in the publishing sense and in the pedagogical sense. And again, this is where we kind of started thinking, okay, this isn't there, this should be there. And this is very much our approach, I would say, and this is why we find being designers and publishers was a perfect fit. It's like a bridge that almost needs to exist, especially within the realm of where we're working within. Betty, would you agree?
Yeah, completely. And I think I would also say that probably the match of like designers and publishers beyond like certain skills or thinking or mindset that a designer may have, I feel like it's also a lot to do with like designer loving books. Just like there's a fetish of designers and books, and there's just like just a genuine interest in that, and then it's enough of a push for us to become publishers low-key at some point maybe, whereas other disciplines might just be like, why would I do that?
I think it makes tons of sense, and it's a designed artifact. Why wouldn't designers be making it, as long as they respect, which clearly you all do, respect the written word, respect original content, and what Becky was talking about, finding gaps in the market. I just want to, it's sort of slight change of topic here, but there's an interesting question gone in the chat, and it's from Petia Morozov, and Petia writes, how do you decide on the quantities for each book? And do you find you need to shop around for printers each time? So to carry that one, I mean, it is a fundamental aspect of publishing, the quantity you produce, and for instance, we had unit editions. We have a rule that we publish 2,000 copies, which actually isn't enough for a conventional publisher. Conventional publishers turn their nose up. But our feeling was 2,000 was, we could live with that. If it didn't sell particularly well, we can deal with that. If you print 10,000, you've got a problem if it doesn't sell. So, Betty, Becky, do you want to just say something about your decision making in terms of quantity, and also this technical side of printing? How and where do you print?
Well, I think we're the small dogs here. So we publish really slow, like low amounts for so far. So I think the biggest quantities we've printed was 200.
Yeah, and it's a money thing. It's if the book requires per unit a higher cost, then we'll only print 200, 150.
Yeah.
And if it's a bit more sustainable, lower scales of cost, then we've got more units. And when it comes to printers, we had some really good relationships already when we were at the RCA, and we continued with that. And through the network, we found more and more printers that accommodated our values, our needs. They were local. And again, it was a very organic process, and always a bit nervous to try new printers. We try it through our clients because we're not paying for it, but like if the client is paying and if we feel like there's enough trust there, then we'll happily shop around. But it always depends on each book, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also the reason we started with low numbers, because obviously it doesn't make it as financially sustainable as if you print 2,000, which is why we would maybe move towards upwards at some point. But it was because we wanted to publish, we had like so many to publish that we had to like really be strategic about how many we would publish of each in order for all of them to exist.
How many titles did you launch with? It's about 8, wasn't it? Or
I think we're at 8 now.
We're at 8 now, but I think it was 6 then.
6, yeah. Yeah, I remember.
Mm.
What about the mighty Fuel Empire?
20,000
for each title?
I mean, we always discuss the books with our distributors because really, they're the people that have to sell the book. And so they have to be, fairly confident that they can sell a certain amount. But generally, we start with 5,000. And if it sells well, we reprint, which we do fairly often. Yeah. Probably the biggest print run we've done in the first go is 8,000. And I thought so far it's been okay. We've only had literally a couple of books out of about 40 that haven't sold enough. So, but yeah, I mean, for us, 2,000 copies wouldn't really even cover our expenses. In terms of printing, we print quite a lot in China because, they're fairly big quantities and it keeps the unit cost low. And so that keeps the cover price affordable. We also print in Belgium and sometimes Italy.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of do shop around, and it sort of depends what you're printing, where you can print as well. Some of our stuff we can't print in China because it's a bit naughty, so that has to get printed, in Europe, basically.
Yeah.
But I mean, we like our books to be relatively cheap, so we try and keep them as affordable as possible. And obviously, with a distribution deal, they take a certain cut of the retail price, and then the shop takes a cut. Yeah. So it's sort of quite tough to sell enough to cover your costs and then into profit.
Yeah,
you have to be confident about the book.
Yeah. I think that leads nicely on to another area I want to talk about finding your audience. I wonder how each of you thinks about that process. How do you find the people that you know will be interested, or you hope will be interested in your title. So I'm thinking, I think, Damon, you mentioned the fact that, certain authors or someone like Johnny Trunk, who you work with, will have a substantial internet following, social media following. How much do you rely on that? Because one of the ironies of my publishing venture, Unit Editions, was that we've only survived because of the internet. And there's a sort of irony there. We would not have survived if there hadn't been the internet, because through the internet we came, although this has just changed recently, but essentially you could only buy our books online. So this was a paradox. Here we were saying books are great, books are sacred artifacts, and look how wonderful they are, but you can only get them through the internet. Which is why we could survive on I say survive, struggle along on selling 2,000 copies, because every time we got an order, we'd stick it in the post. So this became an obsession with us about how we speak to people, how we communicate with our audience. Can you maybe say a little bit about this, how you guys handle it?
I don't think we're very good at it, to be honest. I think we kind of, because each book that we do, it comes back to what I was saying earlier, is like we have to be interested in the subject matter, and for that reason, ultimately the kind of primary audience is us, and because if we don't like it, we ain't going to do it. So I think then when you get involved in a project because you think it's of value, or there's something about it that you think you can do something with it, then I think then you start to think about the audience, but it's definitely kind of secondary, or even not at all. I mean, the stuff with Johnny, he already has his audience, so that's kind of okay. But if Johnny pitched a book to us that we didn't want to do because we're not that interested in it, we wouldn't do it. So it's that's the kind of deal. It's not, each book is kind of different in that respect, in the audience respect, but we're not very proactive about trying to understand our audience or communicate with our audience. I think also partly because with you publish graphic design, and that is a definite kind of focus. Yeah. Whereas ours is just, the subjects are all over the place. We'll do one on Russian tattoos, then one on council houses. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, where does that? We haven't got a set audience apart from the set audience that collects our books. So,
Yeah. No, it makes lots of sense.
Yeah.
Betty, what's your process for selling millions of copies?
Yeah, I have to admit, Adrian, I haven't really thought about it up until you've asked the question, which says a lot, I think. When it comes to audience, it's similar to what you're saying as well, is that there's topic areas that I personally think are relevant to everyone. And when we say we decolonize visual culture, I think that affects everyone. I think to some extent, I think you could learn a thing or two with picking up any of our books, but of course some will have a tendency to be more interested than others. Some might find it not so interesting, which is fine, but it's similar to when you look at literature. I mean, I don't want to put it on the same pedestal, but it's so broad. It affects so many demographics, and we're very intentional with that. Even when it comes to groups, we don't really discriminate. We have a book that caters to school children, and then we have a book actually for people in postgraduate studies. So when it comes to audience, I don't think I have an answer for you. One thing I will say, though, is that Betty and I try to be very active in different spaces. We try to be present. We try to be supportive of other creatives that represent some of what we do. And then naturally, the audience kind of finds us, I would say.
Yeah. There's a famous quote, and I think it was one of the surrealists. I wish I could remember, but he said, "We publish to make comrades." And
Mm,
I kind
yeah,
of
I like that.
that idea of communities and like-mindedness and subjects that are in the ether. But I think that the thing that comes through strongly from all of you is this idea of publishing something that you believe in and then letting it find its own audience. And that was certainly true of how we operated. We did use social media. We staged events and whatnot. We were actively promoting. But ultimately, the books find that if there's an audience for them, the audience will find them.
Mm.
You have to trust that. So we're going to try and go to some questions, but I've got two more kind of really big things I'd like to just to quickly tackle you on. I've got a question here. What do you think the biggest barrier to survival? We've called this talk independent publishing a survival guide. So I suppose we should think a little bit about survival. What's the biggest barrier to survival? What might knock you out of the game, for instance? That's a brutal question.
Not selling enough copies is the obvious.
At this stage, I would say financial, I think. For us, that's the main barrier. And time a little bit, because we do run a graphic design studio on the side. So, well, it's more like Sold Out is on the side of Plan B, actually. So yeah, time and money are the two barriers, I would say, for us. Because you can burn yourself out if you're not careful. So yeah.
And the other is maybe sometimes being taken seriously. I think we sit at a interesting intersection of we're in our late 20s, early 30s. We're very young still when it comes to our studio practice and our publishing practice. Our views and perspectives are sometimes a bit outside of the norm, or not the mainstream, I would say. And then you're fighting your way in a bit. Then you're saying, the way we're developing our visuals or our content, it might not sound as polished or it might not sound as relevant to you, but there's substance in it. And those conversations, or even getting an entry point into a room sometimes, is not always the easiest, I would say. And maintaining that, I would say, is a bit of a barrier sometimes.
Stamina.
Yeah.
That's very interesting because, I began by saying how great it all is in publishing. It's been democratized, the barriers are down, but certain barriers are still there and take much longer to dislodge. So that was really interesting. Stephen, Damon, what might say?
I mean, just sort of keeping it going and keeping the wheels turning. And, there's only the two of us here and we publish maybe 4 books a year. And it can feel quite relentless, that kind of working, finishing one and starting another one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just selling enough copies to, keep going.
Also, I think the more you sell, the kind of, or not the more you sell, the more books you produce, the more you can kind of continue in a way, because they're kind of, they're slowly selling behind you as you're on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So although it does feel relentless, the relentlessness has a purpose in a strange way, because you're always moving on to the next thing, publishing the next book, and then that one sits in the background or steadily sells away while you're on to the next one. And you almost have to keep that momentum going, otherwise that's where you're going to end up in trouble, I think. And if you suddenly kind of stop, like we did stop for a season, so we only published I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, we published 2 books instead of 4. We kind of, I mean, it wasn't too bad financially, but we just kind of felt there was a big hole in our kind of list, and that was a bit surprising, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely get that sense of commitment. If you're going to do this, you have to do it well. You have to do it to the best of your ability, and that can be draining. Can also be very satisfying when you do something and you're proud of it, and it gets a good response. That's a great feeling, but it requires huge amounts of work. I'm just looking at the questions that are coming in, but while I'm looking at those, I'm just going to ask you about all to give one piece of advice to anyone thinking of starting their own imprint. What's the one thing? I mean, keeping it to one might be difficult, but have a go. What's the one thing you would advise someone to do? And I'm going to quickly look
Do
at
it.
You got
Just
one,
do
Dan?
it.
Just start tomorrow.
Yeah.
what.
Yeah.
Publish
Go
something
for it.
worthwhile, something that you think needs to be out there. I mean, it's simple, but it has to be a good idea that you think is going to work.
Yeah. So
Use spell check.
spell check. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Get a proofreader, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, it was quite daunting when we decided within one day to start a publishing house, find a name, start a website. But then also when we were in the process of doing it and demystifying what actually is behind starting a publishing house, it wasn't actually as complex as I personally thought it would be. I think running it and then maintaining it is a whole other ball game, but starting it, I would highly encourage everyone who's thinking of it to give it a go.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I'm looking at there's some fantastic questions, and if we had another hour, we could deal with them. Here's an interesting one. And this is from Springjoy Design, and they say, what tools do you use to check for plagiarism in content, considering the presence of AI tools like ChatGPT? I'm not sure any of us encounter plagiarism, but I suppose I mean, maybe I mean, the AI question is interesting, and if anybody's got any thoughts on that, that would be helpful. But I suppose there is the question of maybe not so much plagiarism, but copyright. We always have to be hyper aware of copyright. Any thoughts around? It's quite a big topic, I know, but checking for plagiarism, copyright.
We've done a couple of books recently where we've had to spend a lot of time getting image rights, and that's quite time consuming and can be expensive. So if you make a book with an author that creates their own work, it's easier, I guess.
I saw something recently that was actually a few years ago that art book publishing, the conventional art world book of publishing, is suffering because estates of recently dead artists are being very, very restraining in their rights, and that's actually damaging the ability for publishers to produce books. And weirdly, it's just beginning to happen in graphic design as people realize that graphic design has a value, and so we haven't really had too much of a problem. But occasionally, you come up against people who want substantial amounts of money so that you can reproduce their work. Any thoughts on AI? You could just hand your next book project over to ChatGPT, surely.
Any thoughts on AI? That's a very loaded question.
I mean, we have used ChatGPT to kind of check things out. So if we're coming up with a kind of blurb for a book, then we might whack it into ChatGPT or ask a question of ChatGPT to come up with a similar thing, in case there's aspects of it that we haven't thought about. And because it's scanning the whole internet, or I hope it is anyway, that kind of, sometimes you can find some stuff in there, keywords that you might want to pull out and use, and as a tool, I think, I'm hopeful that it's going to be useful.
Yeah, no, I am too. I know there's a huge discussion to be had around this subject, not just in relation to publishing, but I'm optimistic too. I use it to take out some of the drudgery in the work that I do. Okay, anonymous attendee. I'm such a shame we can't deal with all these questions because they are so. But anonymous attendee, hi anonymous, says, what about royalties from sales of your books? Do they help? Do you recommend being a member of ALCS? I absolutely do. I don't know if you guys are members of ALCS. I urge you to join because it's and it's particularly relevant, I think, it's relevant to all of you, but I think Betty and Becky, you might find this extremely helpful. It's the body that collects the royalties from mostly universities and schools and libraries who collect the fees for photocopy.
It's PRS, isn't it?
Yeah, we got a different version of that, but yeah, same
but
deal.
they're not the same. You need both.
Right.
But ALCS, I've been amazed at I mean, it's not huge sums of money, but actually, what I think, particularly in your case, Betty and Becky, you'll have found that your books will have been photocopied and used in university libraries. So ALCS, it's worth looking into. I'm just being inundated with questions here. So let me just quickly find another one. Sold out. This is another autonomous attendee, or maybe it's the same. Sold out. Do you publish with diverse people or people of color from outside UK and Europe? And what do you feel about promotion and sales since your print runs are smaller than the usual? How would you position yourself in the market?
We do. That's the first answer to the first question.
I would say primarily almost 80% of our authors are people of color. They're not all from outside of the UK, but I would say 2 are. Yeah.
More, I think. More than 2.
More.
I can at least think of 2, 3, maybe 2, 3.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
being very confusing. 3. And then what do we feel about promotion and sales since our print runs are smaller than usual? I mean,
Showing
promotion, it doesn't impact. Sorry, say that, Becky.
So showing up to book fairs, I think, was a good way of promoting ourselves. But beyond that, give us tips. We need them because we're not very good at it, I would say, yet.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the small print run doesn't really affect promotion or sales in the, like, other than our own personal finance. The fact that we have a small print run doesn't really affect anything because we can really, like, send books to a lot of bookshops still. So when you have like 200 copies, you still have quite a few to distribute. You need to make a decision on how many you want to sell through yourself and how many you want to sell through bookshops and through can you participate into a book fair and stuff like that. It is an investment. And yeah, the Kickstarter also for promotion, I would actually reiterate what Phil said as well. It really helped, like we got press from it as well. Which we probably wouldn't have otherwise. And yeah, how we position ourselves in the market, like tiny dogs, small.
But in different bookshops, going to bookshops, speaking to different people at fairs, doing talks, just being open to conversations, and that's helped us a lot more than we ever thought it would.
Yeah, and I think like publishing as an industry, like it's a bit scary because like obviously it's like quite maybe a big investment in the beginning of time, of money, and you're not sure you're going to see that again. But it brings you also so much. Like we met so many incredible people through Sold Out. We got so many opportunities. We got to travel. We got to do so many fun things that otherwise it's like a personal project. It's so enriching as well. And yeah, so I would still very much recommend people that want
we
to.
We even found clients for Plan B through Sold Out. So
that's interesting. That's interesting. Damon and Steve, how has your publishing activities impacted, affected, changed your design practice?
Um,
Are they-
I think people do see us as publishers now rather than a design group.
really?
So I think
I think because we've been doing that for so long now, I think some people, that's the first thing they know us for. So,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, we've been going since 1991, but we've been doing the publishing since sort of 2005, I think. So, you know, that it's quite a long time, and we've got quite a back catalogue. And so a lot of people have just seen that and not actually looked at our design work, which obviously it's also been going on for a long time. But I think most of our design work is like art catalogues of book
people that work a long time as well. So yeah, we haven't had any new clients recently, but we haven't had time anyway, so it's okay.
There was a question. I mean, again, I'm sorry we can't deal with all the questions, but there's a question here which I think is relevant to the fact that this discussion is rooted in design. We're all designers. Someone says, how important do you think the style of a book is, such as moving away from traditional formats and playing with different sizes, binding, and interactivity? So what part does this desire or this interest in moving away from traditional formats, how is that a part of anyone's thinking?
I would say for us, when we were in fairs and we saw people picking up a book, it would often be the ones that had unusual formats to them. And not always, but I would often notice that they're going for the ones that were a bit unconventional. So I think also Sold Out is for experimentation, for diversifying different formats. So for us, it's incredibly important to push the boundaries a bit.
But then we're also like mindful, and we've learned that like it kind of makes sense, but like a lot of our books don't have spines, which obviously for bookshop isn't a great thing. So it's like there is always like it's knowing your audience, knowing or like like in a book, some books do better in book fairs, some books do better online, and some books do better in bookshops, and that's very dependent on their format and how they're like, because for example we have one that's riso printed. It does great in book fairs because rice, so it's nice. Online not so good because the pictures is kind of hard to get the vibe. So like so many details, it's so dependent.
Yeah. I one of the things that we've done is taken advantage of the fact that until recently we were almost exclusively web-based. The only way to buy our books was through the internet, and so we could do things like leave the name of the book off the cover. You know, in the scale of things is hardly, you know, a cure for cancer, but it was a refreshing thing to do, and it was a breaking away from the traditional the rules and the obligations and the protocols of traditional publishing. Looking at our time, we're sort of out of time now. Joe, are you still with us somewhere?
Yes, of course. I'm here.
I haven't lost you. I mean, I feel terrible because I've never seen so many questions. We just inundate.
This is so great. We're really glad we have a very engaged audience.
Yeah.
I think if you're happy, we can go for one more.
Okay, well, let's try. Do you have one you'd like us to ask? Because I'm sort of overwhelmed by the sort of technical questions like how do you deal with distribution, but I think we've sort of answered that. Our choice was internet only. Betty and Becky have talked about book fairs, which I think is a really important subject to bring up. I mean, there is a whole almost alternative publishing world based around book fairs. And funnily enough, another RCA student, a wonderful Korean student, she was there a few years ago. She's actually written a book. I have it here. I'd like to try and grab it if I can. She's written a book about the phenomenon of the phenomena of book fairs. So there's a really viable avenue for or platform for exploration there. Let me see if I can find a killer question to end on. I mean, they're all good.
There is a really good one from an anonymous attendee. What are the trendy topics that you're currently interested in?
Oh, okay. Right. Well,
Yeah.
we who would like to take that one? Trendy topics. I mean, maybe our question would be, what's your definition of trendy? I mean,
It changes every day.
it does.
I'm a huge sucker for trendy topic substacks, and every day there's 10 new cycles. So I can't pick one. I can't think of one I could pick.
Yeah.
We're making a book about propaganda at the moment.
Really?
That trendy topic.
Yeah. It's now.
Funny enough.
It's trendy now. Yeah, I think you have to be aware of trends in publishing. I mean, go back to the one thing I think we're all agreed on, and I hope it's the thing that really has come out of this conversation. I keep seeing questions that I think we should ask, but this idea of conviction, that the only way to survive as a small independent publisher is to have conviction, to believe in your craft, the craft of designing, writing, and making books, but also the conviction in the subject matter. And I think for me that rules over everything. But also you have to be aware of how the world is changing and what's happening. I mean, something I think we didn't do enough for was making sure that our books were sustainably produced. I don't think we just didn't do enough in that area. We were so seduced by the idea of making quality books that things like sustainability, which we haven't really talked about, got thrown out of the window. So I think we could probably believe in your craft, baby, says Tamim. Thank you, Tamim. Believe in your craft. Absolutely. So, Joe, shall we wrap up?
Yes, I would like to thank everyone who joined today's talk. Adrian, Becky, Betty, Stephen, and Damon, I would like to thank you for sharing your insights and expertise. And we will share a link to the recording of the session with everyone who registered for the event later this week, or probably early next week. Please do join us for the next in-session talk, Curating After the Internet, on the 24th of April. I would like to basically thank everyone for their time, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.